"Don't move," he hissed the warning even as his hands shot up to brace her hips. She had come out of nowhere, practically falling from a hidden panel in the freighter's hull, and the instant she landed in his lap, a brilliant swirl of neon light coursed along her skin. The eerie glow, an opalescent shimmer that traveled from her shoulders to her fingertips, made him freeze. It wasn't just the soft press of her body against his thighs that stunned him. It was the way her eyes flared with a cautious, predatory gleam. She looked half feral and entirely too alluring, her high cheekbones and luminescent crest suggesting an otherworldly heritage he'd never encountered in the outlying starfields. She braced herself against his chest, scanning him with parted lips, every breath releasing a faint hum as if she communicated in frequencies he couldn't decipher. He cleared his throat, but didn't push her away. "Do you mind?" he said as calmly as possible. "I'm trying to fix a stabilizer coil here." She blinked, tilting her head in confusion before focusing on the metal rod in his hand. Then, unexpectedly, she wriggled deeper into his lap, hooking one leg over his knee. He felt a rush of warmth, a jolt of maddening awareness that made him nearly drop his tools. "Okay," he muttered under his breath, "so this is happening." He didn't even know her name, but apparently his body was the best seat in the cargo hold. Moments earlier, he'd been adjusting the starboard thruster in a cramped maintenance corridor. The last thing he expected was an alien stowaway. "Who are you?" he tried again, ignoring the fact that she was basically straddling him. Her features were humanoid, but enthrallingly different. Two small fins along her collarbones, a faintly bioluminescent pattern swirling from the corners of her eyes. When she parted her lips, her teeth gleamed sharper than a human's, and a small, purring click rose from her throat. An answering wave of color pulsed across her cheekbones. She repeated the sound, a series of quick churs, and then lightly tapped his chest with her palm. The sensation was electric. "I'm not sure what that means," he said, swallowing hard. "Is this some kind of greeting, or—" Her gaze darted down as if she realized for the first time exactly where she was perched. She made a small, throaty exclamation and tensed to leap off him. But as soon as she lifted her weight from his lap, a burst of bright violet color flashed across her arms. She froze, making a distressed sound, and sank back down with a resigned sigh. She pointed at the overhead panels, possibly indicating the cramped space she'd been hiding in. "You were stowing away," he murmured. "On my ship, right?" He tried not to stare at the way her body curved, the faint glow of her skin highlighting every subtle shift of muscle. "Listen," he continued, "I get it. Maybe you're running from something, or you're trying to get somewhere. I'm Jamin," he added, sliding the stabilizer coil behind him. "I'm just a scrapper trying to survive. If you need a ride, that's negotiable, but not like this." Slowly, he lifted his hands from her waist in a show of trust. She watched him curiously, her shimmering eyelashes fluttering in a kind of confused half-blink. She answered with a series of melodic clicks that shifted in pitch. Jamin couldn't understand a word, but her tone indicated both apology and exasperation. Then, in a gesture as universal as a handshake, she offered her palm. Her nails were slightly translucent, a swirl of colors dancing beneath them like captured fireflies. Jamin took her hand, feeling a delicate tingle when their skin met. "We'll figure out the communication thing," he said, ignoring the flutter in his stomach. "No problem." He glanced around the cramped corridor. The overhead lights flickered ominously, an indicator that the old freighter's power distribution was straining again. "This ship is half rust, half salvage," he said with a self-deprecating shrug. "If you're planning on hitching a ride, you're picking a questionable vessel." She just studied him, her curious gaze tracing his mouth as if searching for meaning in the shapes of his words. He gently shifted, trying to ease her off his lap, but she clutched at his shirt with a soft hiss, glancing around wildly. Violet flared across her cheeks again, and Jamin realized that every time she attempted to leave his immediate space, her skin erupted in luminous signals. Something about that reaction wasn't random. "Hey, it's okay," he murmured, forcing calm into his voice. "Are you stuck, hurt, or is this some cultural thing?" He exhaled. "I guess we're doing this together." He started to maneuver them upright, and she clung to him as he shuffled backward down the corridor. His boots scraped along the metal grating, and her grip on his shoulders tightened. They stumbled into a supply junction, the overhead flickering making her glow appear even more intense. She pressed her nose near his collarbone, inhaling deeply, and an excited ripple of color raced along her arms. Jamin felt a sudden rush of heat, as though her fascination with his scent had a direct line to his pulse. Finally, they tumbled into a more open corridor. "Any chance you know how to speak standard?" he ventured. Her ears, or the thin fins along her temples, quivered. She shook her head, making a frustrated sound. He watched the swirl of her luminescent markings, noticing how they pulsed in quick waves of pink and orange whenever he spoke. "You do pick up on my tone, don't you?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though the movement was hesitant, as if her body and mind processed his words on separate channels. Jamin tried to set her down on her feet, but the moment he shifted his grip, she jerked and made that distressed chirr. A second later, he sensed movement in the corridors. A heavy clank from the direction of the cargo bay. "Uh-oh," he muttered. "I'm not alone on this wreck." A moment later, a metallic voice boomed. "Trespassers will be terminated. This vessel is under repossession." Jamin felt her stiffen. He whispered urgently, "We need to move, quietly." Tucking an arm around her waist, he guided her down the hall, the two of them crouching behind crates. He peered around a corner to see a towering security droid scanning the area with a bright search beam. Jamin's heart thudded. The last time he'd crossed corporate subjugators, it hadn't ended well. "Just my luck," he muttered. He and the woman exchanged a tense glance. Her pupils narrowed, then she grabbed his wrist and yanked him into an alcove. Her strength stunned him. For someone so slender, she was surprisingly powerful. She pressed a glowing fingertip to his lips, effectively shushing him, then carefully peered out at the patrolling droid. As the droid's footsteps receded, Jamin exhaled. "You're good at this," he whispered, impressed. She grinned, revealing a flash of bright, pointed teeth that made his pulse quicken. There was something about her wild presence that lit a fire inside him, a deep curiosity and attraction that felt absurd given the circumstances. "Let's get to the cockpit," he decided. "I might still outrun them if I can power up the engines." She nodded as if reading his body language more than his words and gestured for him to lead. This time she managed to stand on her own, though she kept a hand on his belt, apparently unwilling to break contact. The two of them ducked through the narrow corridor, weaving around crates of scavenged mechanical parts. Jamin's mind raced. If some corporate sniffer had discovered his ship, they'd likely try to seize it for unpaid docking fees. Normally, he'd slip out a vent and disappear, but now he was entangled with an alien stowaway who seemed physically unable or unwilling to let him out of her reach. They reached the cockpit ladder. "Up," he mouthed, pointing above. She nodded, but when he tried to scale it first, she let out a soft whimpering note and grabbed his pant leg. It was absurdly endearing, the way she clung to him. He tried offering a reassuring smile. "Come on, I'll help you, but we have to move fast." With some coaxing, she finally allowed him to climb, following close behind, her body pressed to his, every motion causing that distracting friction that made him overly aware of her every contour. Her breath was hot against his neck. "Focus," he mumbled to himself. They emerged into the cockpit, and he immediately slid into the pilot's seat, initiating the startup sequence. The lights around the console flickered uncertainly. "Don't fail me now," he pleaded with the outdated engine. The woman hovered at his shoulder, scanning the controls with curiosity. Her key ears twitched at every beep of the console. Jamin braced for the worst, half expecting the entire system to short out. Suddenly, the overhead display flared bright red, indicating multiple hull breaches. "That's not good," he muttered. "We either have pirates cutting through or the repossession droid is forcibly accessing the cargo bay." He slammed his fist on the ignition switch, and the engine sputtered but remained stubbornly offline. "Come on, come on." He fumbled with the manual override, his mind flashing through potential escape routes. Meanwhile, the woman leaned over him, her glowing fingertips gently pressing random buttons. He tried not to be distracted by her closeness, but then an alert dinged. The engine hummed. She had triggered something. "How did you?" he started to ask, but she cut him off with an eager grin and gestured for him to try the ignition again. This time, the engines roared to life. Jamin let out a triumphant laugh. "Brilliant," he praised her. She didn't understand his words, but the tone made her glow a soft pink. He angled the ship's thrusters. "Hold on tight," he warned. She braced against the wall, fingers splayed, eyes wide. The entire ship rumbled as he lifted off, the vibrations sending hems staggering into each other. Before he could compensate, the cargo bay doors were wrenched open and the vacuum of departing atmosphere howled. Alarms blared. He fought with the controls, adrenaline spiking. "We're losing structural integrity," he barked, even though she couldn't understand. She responded by slamming a hand onto his harness latch, freeing it, and then dragging him out of his seat before the overhead collapsed. They tumbled in a heap on the floor. The ship lurched, the cockpit twisting sideways as the artificial gravity flickered. Jamin clutched her, pressing her face against his chest to shield her from flying debris. He gritted his teeth and fought the controls with his free hand, trying to stabilize the angle. Sweat dripped down his temples. He glimpsed the droid's silhouette through the shattered hull window. "No time to do this gracefully," he growled, lunging to punch the hyperdrive activation, well aware that jumping to FTL mid-atmosphere could fry half their systems. But better catastrophic damage than capture. He felt her tense, her eyes boring into him as if asking, "Are you sure?" He had no choice. With a last-ditch effort, he slammed the lever forward. A deafening roar filled the cockpit, and reality seemed to twist sideways. The freighter jolted into faster-than-light travel, the hull creaking ominously as stars streaked into swirling lines outside. The corridor lights flickered from red to pitch black. For a moment, Jamin feared they'd tear themselves apart. Then the engine settled into a strained hum. He exhaled, chest burning with panic. They were alive. He still felt her pinned beneath him, her breath hot against his neck. Slowly, he lifted his head, meeting her gaze. That swirl of glowing markings pulsed across her cheeks in rapid waves. She let out a shaky, triumphant click, and for the first time, Jamin laughed breathlessly. "Well," he murmured, "that was a hell of a first date." Her eyebrow quirked in confusion, but her lips curved in a grin that suggested she found his tone amusing. He found himself grinning back at her like an idiot. Then he remembered that she was still in his lap, her leg curled around his waist. His heart pounded, telling him it was more than just adrenaline that made his skin tingle. They lay there in the darkness, only the faint glow of her markings and the console's emergency lights illuminating their faces. He studied her expression, trying to parse what was happening behind those lumino. "Us eyes. We're safe," he said, even though she couldn't understand him. Gently, he stroked a stray strand of her shimmering hair away from her face, hoping the gesture conveyed reassurance. She blinked, her eyes flicking to his mouth. Then she inhaled the air near his neck again, letting out a soft purr. "What's that about?" he asked, half laughing at the ticklish sensation. She responded by trailing her fingertips along the collar of his jacket. A spark of warmth shot through him, and the tension in the air shifted from survival panic to something far more intimate. "Hey," he breathed, trying to keep his head clear. "Maybe we should see if the hull is stable first, yeah?" She didn't budge. Her parted lips were dangerously close to his, and his heart thudded in his ears. "Easy, sweetheart," he whispered, but his voice betrayed a definite lack of resolve. She leaned in, and for a crazy second he thought she might kiss him. Instead, she just rested her forehead against his, exhaling softly. Her skin was warm, almost feverish. An alarm beeped, snapping him back. "Right," he said, clearing his throat and carefully helping her to her feet. "We should check on everything." She swayed slightly, putting a hand to her temple as if dizzy. Jamin steadied her with an arm around her waist. Her luminescent markings flared for a moment at his touch, then slowly eased. He guided her to the co-pilot's chair, wincing at the sparks that rained from the overhead panel. The ship's battered interior moaned with the strain of the forced jump. "We need to find a place to land," he muttered, scanning the star charts. The nav system flickered with error codes, but eventually he locked onto a set of coordinates that indicated a probable safe orbit. "Some outer rim planet," he said. "We'll set down there, patch up the hull, hopefully not blow ourselves to bits in the process." The woman studied him silently, as if trusting him completely. He found that terrifying and oddly moving. As the ship continued to hum with the residual FTL friction, Jamin tried to reorient. They were far from any established trade routes now, drifting in the unknown. The woman watched him with that intense focus, as though memorizing his every gesture. He made a conscious effort to remain calm, not wanting to startle her. On a hunch, he tapped the console's translator interface and offered her the earpiece. She eyed it suspiciously. "It's to help you understand me," he explained, forgetting momentarily this. He couldn't grasp his words. But maybe she'd recognize the universal translator symbol. He gently lifted a strand of her hair away from her ear fin, then motioned to place the device. She hesitated, then nodded. When the earpiece settled in place, he flipped the switch. A brief hum indicated it was scanning for her vocal patterns. "Hello," Jamin said tentatively. She flinched as the translator beeped. The device's digital voice stuttered, spitting out garbled phrases. She frowned, releasing a flurry of clicks and churs that caused the translator to whine. Then a flicker of something resembling language came through. Understand," she gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Jamin's heart soared. "Yes, that's it," he encouraged her. "Keep going." She closed her eyes, breathed, and tried again, her voice quiet and musical. The translator faltered, then started to piece together partial words. This, safe." She opened her eyes, meeting Jamin's gaze with trembling excitement. "Safe," she repeated, the single syllable emerging clearer from the translator. Jamin laughed. "Yes, safe," he patted the console. "We're okay. No one's gonna hurt you here." She nodded, pressing a trembling hand to her chest and speaking softly into the T. Translator. "Name is Odris." The device churned, and a beat later, "My name, Odris," emerged in a digital monotone. Jamin's grin stretched ear to ear. "Odris," he repeated, loving the way it felt in his mouth. She let out a relieved laugh, a melodic sound that made him feel almost dizzy. He pressed a hand to his chest in return. "Jamin." "I'm Jamin." She repeated his name carefully, as if tasting each sound. A giddy relief washed through him. Finally, they had a starting point, a means to bridge the confusion. The star chart beeped that they'd arrived at the safe orbit coordinates. The planet below them was a swirling mixture of green jungles and hazy purple seas. Unmapped territory, as far as he could tell. Jamin engaged the landing thrusters, ignoring the creaks and groans from the battered ship. Odris gripped the edges of her seat as they entered the atmosphere, each bump causing her to yelp softly. "Not the smoothest ride," Jamin admitted, wincing as the landing gear screeched. Eventually, they broke through the cloud cover. A wide expanse of dense emerald canopy spread below like a living carpet. He found a clearing near a cluster of ancient ruins. "Possibly abandoned. We'll put down there," he said, more to himself than to her, but she nodded, face pale with nerves. The landing was rough, the ship lurching as it settled. Alarms complained, sparks flew from the console, but the hull finally stabilized. Jamin exhaled. "That's done." He turned to Odris, who looked simultaneously terrified and exhilarated. "Welcome to wherever we are," she smiled. Her markings flared in a gentle swirl, signifying, he hoped, relief. Standing, Jamin tested his weight on his shaky legs. "We should see if the outside atmosphere is breathable." Odris surprised him by lightly touching the back of his neck, her warm hand lingering there, in a gesture that felt oddly comforting. They left the cockpit together, rummaging through lockers until Jamin found a portable scanner. He led the way to the airlock, watching Odris run her fingertips over the walls in fascination. "You haven't been off your planet much, have you?" he asked softly. She responded with a small tilt of her head, not quite understanding. The translator crackled. "I alone fear," it relayed. He heard the sadness in her tone. Even if the words were muddled, something about that tugged at his chest, a reminder that she was vulnerable in a universe that often preyed on the weak. At the airlock, he cued and calm, and to let a small sample of outside air in. The scanner beeped green, indicating it was safe enough for basic respiration. "We're lucky," he murmured, donning a half-mask in case of pathogens. "Here," he said, offering Odris a similar mask, but she hesitated, sniffing at it, then releasing a chirp that sounded suspiciously like she was laughing. Carefully, he helped her secure it over her nose and mouth. Her eyes glowed with curiosity, and she returned his intense stare with one of her own, swirling with pinkish light. Then he hit the release. The ramp lowered, revealing a humid, heavily forested landscape. Thick vines and enormous blue ferns swayed in a breeze that smelled of rain and strange spices. Odris inhaled deeply, her chest rising, and let out a contented purr. Jamin carefully stepped onto the soft soil, boots squelching in the muddy ground. The old freighter hissed and pinged behind them, steam rising from the overworked thrusters. He scanned the horizon, noticing towering stone structures half consumed by moss and creeping vines. It was eerily quiet, just the distant call of alien birds echoing through the canopy. "Let's see if we can find some salvage to patch the hull," he said, mostly to himself. "Stay close," he urged, reaching for Odrissa's hand. She didn't hesitate, slipping her fingers through his, apparently trusting him as her guide. They made their way toward the ruins, stepping over thick roots that twisted across the ground. Each step brought new wonders: bioluminescent beetles scurrying over stones, flowers that opened with a hiss to release shimmering clouds of pollen. Odris's markings flickered in response, as though in conversation with the local flora. She let out delighted chirrs, pointing at each marvel. Jamin found himself smiling. Her awe was contagious. The translator earpiece tried to keep up with her excited chatter, but it mostly produced broken phrases: "so shiny, beautiful, my home, used to." She sighed, and a wave of sadness crossed her features. He squeezed her hand, wishing he could understand more. The ruins loomed ahead, massive archways carved with runic symbols. Vines draped from weathered statues, some depicting tall, elegant figures with elongated limbs. Odris tilted her head as she took in the architecture. Then she reached out and pressed her palm against one of the symbols. A faint glow pulsed where her skin made contact, as if some ancient text still slumped. Red in these stones, Jamin felt a ripple of energy through the air that made his hair stand on end. "What the?" he muttered, carefully leaning in. Symbol that Odris had touched now glowed with the same hue as her markings. "Are you doing that?" he asked, confused. She shrugged, equally puzzled, and tried another symbol. This time nothing happened. She frowned, glancing at him as though he might have answers. "Don't look at me," he said. "I'm just a scrapper. I've never seen anything like this." The translator hissed, "Ancient echo, like..." She pressed a hand to her temple as though rummaging her memories. Jamin felt a spark of excitement. Maybe these ruins held technology he could salvage for the ship. "Let's see if we can find something valuable," he said, leading her under the arch. Inside, the air was cooler, the stone corridors illuminated by shafts of sunlight through collapsed ceilings. Strange carvings ran along the walls in a spiraling pattern, and the floor was uneven, scattered with debris. They moved slowly, Jamin shining a flashlight while Odris studied every etching, occasionally pointing at a symbol that made her glow. Each time, Jamin's curiosity deepened, but soon a gentle hum caught his ear. At first he thought it was wind, but the pitch rose and fell in a patterned way. Odris tensed, pressing close to him. "Maybe we're not alone," he murmured, scanning the darkness. They followed the sound deeper into the ruin, passing through a broken doorway. What lay beyond made Jamin's heart pound. An enormous chamber, its walls lined with intricately carved pillars that glowed faintly. In the center, a basin of shimmering liquid pulsed in rhythm with the humming. Odris let out a startled chirp, pointing. Her colors flared across her arms, reflecting off the liquid. Then, Jamin noticed something else. Embedded in the pillars were orbs of crystal that looked suspiciously like power sources. A scrapper's dream. "If I can pull those out without bringing the place down, maybe we can fix the ship," he said. Odris nodded, though her gaze was fixed on the basin. She moved closer, intrigued by the swirling fluid that glowed with the same hue as her body. Cautiously, she dipped a fingertip into the liquid. A ripple of purple light traveled up her arm and she sucked in a shocked breath. Jamin grabbed her shoulders, concerned. "Are you all right?" The translator crackled. "Energy? My species? Resonance?" She blinked at him, then drew her finger. "Oh. Cute!" A droplet dangling from her fingertip, her expression was one of wonder. "Resonance," she repeated in a soft, odd tone. Before Jamin could react, a roar echoed through the chamber. He spun around, heart pounding, expecting some monstrous guardian or predatory animal. Instead, an enormous shape lunged from the shadows, a robotic sentinel, similar to the repossession droid but older, covered in moss and half-rusted. Its glowing eyes locked on them, scanning. Then it raised a metal arm. A pulsing orb of energy formed in its palm, aimed directly at Odris. "Run!" Jamin shouted, grabbing her hand. They sprinted behind a pillar as the orb launched with a crash, sending rubble flying. Dust and chunks of stone rained down. Odris let out a terrified chirp, pressing against Jamin's back. He peered around the pillar, mind racing. He had a small blaster, but it probably wouldn't dent that rusted behemoth. Another pulse of energy seared the air, forcing him to duck. "Keep moving," he urged Odris, pointing to the corridor on the other side of the chamber. She nodded, but her eyes flicked to the crystal orbs in the pillars. Jamin understood. If they left now, they'd lose the chance to get the power sources. Without them, the ship may never fly again. Torn between survival and necessity, he hesitated. The sentinel roared again, clanking forward. Odris tugged Jamin's arm insistently. Her gaze was determined, jaw set. "Help me distract it," he whispered, rummaging through his belt for a small coil that could create a flashbang. She nodded, crouching. The sentinel's next energy blast scorched the pillar. Jamin counted to 3, then hurled the coil into the open. A blinding burst of light flooded the chamber, and the sentinel reeled, its scanners overloaded. "Now!" Jamin yelled. He dashed for the nearest pillar, pulling out a compact tool from his pack. Odris followed, pressing her palm to the carved surface. Immediately, the pillar glowed more brightly, and cracks formed around the embedded crystal orb. Realizing what she was doing, Jamin jammed his tool into the seams to pry the orb loose. The sentinel began to recover, stomping closer, sweat beaded on his forehead. "Come on," he growled, leveraging all his weight. At last, the orb popped free. It was about the size of his fist, warm to the touch, humming with latent power. Odris let out a trill of triumph, but the sentinel unleashed another furious blast, forcing them to dive behind debris. The chamber shook. Jamin clutched the orb, heart hammering. One power source might not be enough, but it was better than nothing. "We have to get out of here," he told Odris. She nodded frantically, her eyes on the exit. They sprinted, dodging another volley of energy. The floor trembled with each impact, cracks snaking across the ancient stone. Just as they reached the corridor, the ceiling above the sentinel collapsed. With a final roar, it disappeared beneath tons of rubble, sending up a cloud of dust and broken stone. Coughing, Jamin pulled Odris to him, shielding her from the debris. They tumbled into the corridor, hearts pounding. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Odris broke into a breathless laugh, half relieved, half exhilarated. Jamin released a shaky chuckle in return. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded, eyes shining, her cheeks lit with a swirling glow. He gently brushed dirt from her hair. Despite the near-death situation, a thrill of closeness sizzled between them, as if they'd just survived something life-altering together. She inhaled a shaky breath and spoke softly into the translator. "Thank you for protecting." He smiled, struck by the sincerity in her gaze. They headed back toward the entrance, the orb clutch. Head in Jamin's arms. Outside, the daylight was bright, making them squint. The jungle buzzed with insect life, and the wind carried a tang of ozone. Their ship loomed in the clearing, battered but still intact. Jamin exhaled in relief. Scanning for any sign of trouble, the area seemed deserted, no mechanical menace lurking. He looked at Odris and lifted the orb, giving a hopeful grin. "We might just be able to fix that rust bucket." She nodded, though her gaze drifted to the horizon, pensive. "We fixed," she managed through the translator. "Then—" Her voice trailed off. Jamin understood the uncertainty behind her question. They were still strangers, thrown together by coincidence, and she had no reason to trust him beyond basic necessity. He took her hand gently. "Then we see what's next." She studied his face, her luminous eyes searching. A gentle hush settled over them. Without warning, she stepped closer, pressing her cheek against his shoulder. The moment was unexpectedly intimate, and a slow burn curled in his chest. He let his arm slide around her waist. She felt too warm, almost feverish, but she closed her eyes as though seeking solace. "I'll take care of you," he whispered, even though she could only catch a fraction of his meaning through the translator. Something in her posture softened, and she gave him a small nod, an unspoken acceptance. They trudged back into the ship, pausing occasionally to marvel at the alien flora that tugged at their ankles. Once inside, Jamin wasted no time hooking up the orb to the main power conduit. The effect was instantaneous. Lights flickered back to life, engines whirred softly, and the battered hull's stabilizers began realigning. "We're not out of the woods yet," he muttered, "but this is a good start." He wiped sweat from his brow, glancing at Odris, who was leaning against a crate, breath quick. Her markings flickered in a disjointed pattern. Worried, he crouched next to her. "You okay?" he asked, pressing a palm to her forehead. She felt hot to the touch and her eyes were glassy. Alarm tightened his chest. Had she inhaled something harmful in the ruins? Or was the stress of the day catching up? She managed a shaky smile, but her voice came out broken. "Need safe place, rest." Jamin's throat constricted. "Right. Medbay," he muttered, helping her stand. The ancient freighter's medbay was barely more than a closet, but it had a cot and some scanning tech. He settled her on the bed, pulling out a handheld diagnostic device. She eyed it warily, so he placed his hand on hers, offering a calming nod. She let him wave the scanner over her. Her vitals flashed across the tiny screen in a language he only partially understood. "You're overstimulated, maybe?" He frowned at the device, uncertain. Possibly she needed rest or some nutrient her species was used to. Odris muttered something into the translator, her breathing shallow. "My people, bond is physical, our bodies unstable, without acceptance." Jamin's brow furrowed. "Bond?" he repeated. She nodded, wincing. "When sat on you? Touch? Like a sign? My species believe mating," she broke off, a flush coloring her cheeks. He stared, mind reeling. "So? They think we're—" She gave a tiny embarrassed nod. "Mated," he repeated, dumbfounded. Suddenly, the pieces clicked. Each time she tried to leave his proximity, her body reacted with those flares of color, that sense of distress. The translator beeped. "Need your presence, your acceptance, or my system," she trailed off, trembling. Jamin swallowed hard, heart pounding. This was a cultural and biological collision he'd never anticipated. "So, physically, you're in pain unless we stay close?" She nodded miserably. Jamin rubbed the back of his neck. "Chick." The notion was as arousing as it was unnerving. He wasn't some savage who'd take advantage of an alien forced to cling to him, but Odris's every breath seemed to beckon him closer. "Hey," he said gently, sinking onto the cot beside her. "We'll figure it out. No one's forcing anything." She relaxed slightly, though her eyes gleamed with both relief and a hint of longing. He tried not to dwell on how her skin glowed more vividly when he touched her hand. "Just rest," he coaxed, brushing a thumb over her knuckles. She exhaled slowly, eyelids drooping, as though his touch soothed her. He stayed with her as she dozed off, occasionally adjusting the ship's systems from a control panel on the wall. The planet's day cycle was long, and the surrounding jungle's hum provided a strangely peaceful backdrop. Despite the chaos, Jamin couldn't deny the draw he felt to this mysterious, beautiful alien. Every time she stirred and murmured his name or her markings glimmered in sync with his voice, he felt a surge of protectiveness and something deeper. There was an energy between them that was impossible to ignore, but he forced himself to remain calm, to let her rest. Eventually, he dozed off beside her, lulled by her soft, purring breaths and the steady hum of the orb-charged engines. When he woke, lights in the corridor told him the ship's main power was holding. Odris was awake too, propped on an elbow, studying him with an intensity that made his pulse race. "Hi," he said softly, clearing his sleep-raw throat. She offered a hesitant smile, then touched the translator. "You are kind." Heat crept up his neck. "Thanks," he replied, brushing his hair out of his eyes. Her gaze flicked to his chest where his shirt gaped open, and she let out a small hum of curiosity. Jamin suddenly felt self-conscious. He wasn't used to such blatant observation. "I suppose you've never seen a human man before," he ventured. She shook her head. "Only stories," she managed. Then her cheeks flared pink, and she touched her own arm, indicating her luminescent markings. "When with mate, these lights respond to feeling?" She pressed a hand to her heart. "I feel confused, desire, so they glow?" Jamin swallowed, a tingle running along his spine. "Desire," he echoed. She nodded shyly, her markings shimmering in a slow, undulating pattern of pinkish gold. For a long moment they said nothing, just breathed in the charged air between them. Outside, the jungle seemed far away, the ship's metal like walls forming an intimate cocoon around them. Jamin's heart thundered. He reached out and let his fingers graze her arm. Her breath caught and her eyes fluttered closed. Slowly, carefully, he leaned in, giving her time to refuse if she wanted. She didn't pull away. Instead, she released a tiny whimper that sent a flash of bright color rippling over her skin. At the last second, he hesitated, searching her face for consent, for any sign of fear. She opened her eyes, parted her lips, and offered a small nod, her gaze flicking down to his mouth. He closed the distance, pressing his lips to hers in a gentle, exploring kiss. She drew in a sharp breath through her nose, her body going taut for an instant. Then, her arms slid around his shoulders, and she returned the kiss with a fervor that stole his breath. Her mouth was warmer than he expected, soft yet demanding, and the taste of her was an alien sweetness he couldn't name. A surge of heat coiled in his stomach, and he tightened his hold on her, reveling in the little churring sounds that rose in her throat. When they finally broke apart, both were panting. She pressed her forehead to his, the translator silent, but no words were needed. The thrumming energy between them spoke volumes. That closeness brought another wave of color to her skin, and Jamin felt her trembling. He pulled back slightly, smoothing a hand down her arm. "We should take it slow," he rasped, though his heart clamored for more. She looked at him, confusion flickering in her eyes. The translator managed, "Why slow? We linked." There was genuine puzzlement in her expression, as if she didn't grasp the concept of pacing. Jamin chuckled softly, his desire warring with caution. "Humans are complicated," he said. "We sometimes take time to figure out our feelings, especially when it's something intense." Odris studied him, then brushed a light caress across his jaw. "I want to know you," she said, stumbling a bit on the words, but the meaning was clear. His chest tightened. "I want that too," he admitted, "but I also have a fear, I guess. I don't want to rush," and then he trailed off. The translator tried to convey his hesitation, but she pressed a finger to his lips. Her expression softened and she nodded, making a series of gentle clicks that the translator interpreted as understanding. "We share trust," she said haltingly, her eyes bright with sincerity. Relieved, Jamin exhaled, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "We'll figure it out," he promised. She rested a hand over his heart, feeling it pound, and gave a shy smile. He felt lightheaded, his pulse racing. Maybe going slow was wise, but the magnetism between them was undeniable. Finally, he cleared his throat and stood, offering her a hand. "Come on," he murmured. "Let's see if the ship is stable enough to get us off this rock, or if we're going to have to call it home for a while." She rose gracefully, her limbs still a bit shaky, but her posture more confident than before. They made their way to the cockpit, finding that the orb's energy had indeed stabilized some of the systems. Jamin ran diagnostics, whistling low at the results. "We're still banged up, but the main thrusters might hold for a short hop, maybe to a safer orbit. But long distance? We'd need more repairs." He arched an eyebrow at Odris. "You in a rush to leave?" She looked out the viewport at the vibrant jungle, the towering ruins in the distance. Then she turned back to him, her expression thoughtful. "Not run anymore," she managed through the translator, "but my people, danger?" Her voice tightened with worry. "There are slavers, huntresses, my species rare. They want—" She swallowed, trembling. "I run from them. Hide in your ship." Jamin's gut twisted. So that explained her desperation. She was fleeing slavers, probably planning to stow away until she could find a safe haven. He reached out, covering her hand with his. "I won't let them take you," he said fiercely. She nodded, relief in her eyes, though tension lingered in her features. "They track me," she whispered. "Find me. They kill you." Jamin glanced at the battered scanner array. "We'll be ready," he said quietly. The thought of crossing slavers was sobering. He didn't have an army at his back, just an old freighter and a few salvage connections. But the alternative, letting her face them alone, was unthinkable. "We can't stay here forever," he said, "but maybe we can prepare, fortify the ship, see if there's more salvage in the ruins, and keep an eye out for them." Odris hesitated, then placed a hand on his cheek. "We Together, she said, the translator spitting out a halting but heartfelt phrase. He closed his eyes for a moment, leaning into her touch. Yes, he whispered, we're in this together. He pressed a gentle kiss to her palm. Outside, the jungle called with a distant cry. The day was only beginning, and their uncertain future stretched before them with danger and hope. Yet for the RST time in a long while, Jamin felt a strange sense of belonging. He had no idea what they were getting into, but he knew he couldn't let her go, not now that he'd felt her warmth, her heart beating in sync with his. They spent the next hours combing the cargo hold for anything they could repurpose as defensive measures. Jamin rigged up some proximity alarms around the clearing. Odris helped where she could, using her curious ability to coax latent technology into action. Several times they brushed against each other in the cramped corridors, sending jolts of longing through Jamin's body. He did his best to stay focused on the tasks at hand, but the tension simmered just beneath the surface. Whenever they locked eyes, he saw the same heat reflected in her gaze. Eventually, night fell across the alien jungle, and the low drone of nocturnal creatures surrounded the ship. Jamin set the interior lights to dim, hoping to conserve power. He found Odris in the cargo bay, gently running her fingers over the hull's inner panels, humming a soft, haunting melody. He paused at the threshold, watching her. Each note of her song made her markings glow in a hypnotic pattern. His heart twisted. There was such a quiet beauty in her presence. An unspoken longing that made him want to hold her forever. She noticed him and offered a wistful smile. Singing to calm, she said through the translator, her voice wavering. He approached, resting a hand on the crate beside her. It's lovely, he murmured, though the translator's digital monotone hardly did justice to her music. She nodded, eyes downcast. My mother taught me, she continued softly, before they took her. A pang of sorrow tightened Jamin's chest. I'm sorry, he whispered, gently brushing his knuckles over her cheek. Her markings flickered with gratitude and pain. All day, they danced around the reality of their forced proximity, this strange bond that neither fully understood. Odris had mentioned that her people believed contact signaled a mate. Jamin wrestled with his own confusion. Was this bond genuine or just a biological imperative? He yearned for her, but he also feared messing up, hurting her, or making promises he couldn't keep. Yet every time he looked at her, he felt something powerful pulling him in, a gravity he couldn't deny. She took a small step forward, pressing the length of her body against his. The air crackled with tension. He could feel her heart pounding beneath her luminescent skin. He let out a shaky exhale, sliding his hands along her sides. I don't want to take advantage, he murmured. She tilted her head in confusion, the translator silent. Gently, he tried again. I don't want to hurt you, he clarified. She blinked, then her lips parted in understanding. Through the translator, she managed, You worry my choice? He nodded. She gave him a long, searching look, her eyes softening. Then she pressed her palm to his chest, right over his racing heart. The translator crackled as she spoke with determined clarity. I choose you, it said. Jamin's breath caught. The final word emerged fuzzy, but there was no mistaking her resolve. Slowly, reverently, he dipped his head, capturing her mouth in a tender kiss. She sighed into him, releasing that melodic hum, and the tension that had built between them all day ignited into something fierce and urgent. The cargo bay was silent except for their mingled breaths and the distant night sounds. Jamin wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her close, the heat of her body intensifying the moment until his nerves were ablaze. Her fingers roamed across his shoulders, tracing the lines of muscle with a bold curiosity. Each touch sent a thrill racing through him. He let his hands drift lower, feeling the gentle flare of her hips, the supple curve of her waist. She arched into him, her lips parting to deepen the kiss. A flash of blazing color lit her markings, turning them from soft pink to a vibrant magenta. He groaned at the sight, unaccustomed to such a striking visual display of arousal. She made a soft, needy sound, urging him closer until they were pressed together in a single, heated line. They stumbled, knocking into a crate, but neither cared. The translator earpiece tumbled to the floor with a clatter. For a moment, their communication reverted to pure sensation. No words, just desperate kisses and whispers of need. She tugged at his shirt, fumbling to free him from the fabric. He let out a laugh of pure disbelief, helping her peel it off. Her hands immediately roamed his bare chest, her eyes lighting with wonder. He drank in the sight of her parted lips, her heaving breaths, the swirl of her alien markings that seemed to dance in time with his heartbeat. He trailed kisses along her jaw, inhaling the faint, sweet scent of her skin. She angled her head back, gasping, her nails digging lightly into his shoulders. A primal, possessive urge roared through him. He wanted to claim her to make sure no slaver or corporate scum could ever harm her again. She clutched him tighter, as if sensing the same desire, their bodies pressed together, friction and heat building with every passing second. Her movements became more insistent, and he responded in turn, hands sliding under the minimal fabric she wore. She whispered his name, Jamen, in a breathy tone that electrified his senses. He kissed down her neck, tasting salt and the faint tang of whatever biological chemistry made her glow. She moaned softly, hooking a leg around his hip, urging him to explore more. Unable to resist, he let his mouth travel lower, pressing warm kisses wherever her skin beckoned. She tugged at his hair, her luminescence flickering wildly with each sensation. Time blurred. The tension that had built since their chaotic first encounter on the ship corridor now erupted into raw, intimate abandon. He lifted her, pressing her against the bulkhead, and she clung to him, breathless gasps filling the bay. Their kisses grew deeper, more urgent, as though they sought to fuse their very beings. Even the ship seemed to hum in approval, the power orb's distant thrumming resonating with their shared heat. He was dimly aware of the noise outside. The chirr of insects, the rustle of leaves, but it felt distant and irrelevant. All that mattered was the press of her body, the taste of her lips, the stuttering glow that told him she was as overwhelmed by longing as he was. She sank her nails into his back, hissing his name, her alien accent twisting the syllables in a way that made his stomach flip. He growled softly, pressing harder against her, losing himself in the haze of sensation. At some point, they slid to the floor, arms and legs tangled in a breathless knot. She cupped his face, forcing him to look at her, her gaze searing into his. "Jammin'," she whispered, no translator needed. The raw vulnerability in her eyes struck him like a comet. Heart hammering, he pressed his forehead to hers. In that moment, it didn't matter that they were from different worlds, that they barely shared a language. Their bodies and hearts spoke in a more elemental dialect. As they finally slowed, breathing ragged, she stroked his cheek with trembling fingers. He gently brushed hair from her face, waiting for his heartbeat to settle. Her luminescent markings had calmed to a gentle, steady glow, almost like the slow embers of a dying fire. She gazed at him with an intensity that made his throat tighten. There was something more than lust in her expression. There was trust, gratitude, perhaps even something deeper that he dared not name yet. He pulled her into his arms, pressing a lazy kiss to her forehead. A wave of exhaustion swept over him, mingled with serene satisfaction. She snuggled against his chest, eyes drooping. They lay there on the cargo bay floor, as absurd a place as any for a private moment, and let the hush of the jungle lull them. Eventually, Jamin spotted the translator earpiece a short distance away and reached for it, fumbling it back into place on her ear. He whispered softly, "You okay?" The translator clicked, then echoed her gentle reply, "I, happy, peace." He smiled, closing his eyes. Peace was a rare commodity in this galaxy. If she felt it now, then maybe, for once, he was doing something right. They dozed in each other's arms until a harsh buzz of the proximity alarm jolted them both awake. Jimen scrambled up, heart pounding, adrenaline slamming back into his veins. Odris leapt to her feet, her markings flaring in alarm. He sprinted to the cockpit, nearly tripping over scattered tools. The alarm panel flashed red. Something large was approaching from the sky. "Slavers?" Odris asked. Her voice trembling through the translator. Jamen swallowed hard, scanning the readout. "Could be," he said grimly. "Or whoever the hell those corporate droids report to. Either way, they're not friendly." He grabbed his blaster and tossed Odris a stun baton. She frowned, but took it, her gaze determined. Through the cockpit window, they saw a sleek black vessel slicing through the night clouds, heading straight for their clearing. It bore no obvious insignia, but its design was predatory. Sharp angles, heavy plating, built for combat. Jamin's chest went tight. This was no backwater pirate barge. The engines whined as it began to hover overhead, thrusters pushing leaves and debris into a swirling storm. The ground shook and searchlights bathed the freighter in a blinding glow. "Come out," a booming voice ordered over a loudspeaker. "We want the girl!" Audrey stiffened, her posture rigid with fear. Jamin's jaw clenched. "Well, they're not getting you," he muttered, double-checking his blaster's charge. "But we're outgunned." He glanced at Audrey's heart racing. "We can't fight them head-on, we need to think of something else." She took a deep breath, blinking rapidly. The translator clicked as she spoke. "It will not be taken again." From outside, footsteps pounded as a squad of heavily armed figures in dark armor surrounded the ship. Jamin's stomach lurched. He'd never seen a more lethal-looking group of mercenaries. They carried plasma rifles and one had some sort of pulse cannon strapped to his back. "If we let them breach the hull, we're done," Jamin said, eyeing the battered corridor. "We have to lure them away." He scanned the cockpit for ideas, his mind racing. Then he thought of the abandoned ruins. The Sentinel, the energy basin. Maybe they could funnel these thugs into a trap. He grabbed Audris's hand. "We'll draw them into the ruins," he said, pointing in that direction. She nodded, comprehension dawning. The Sentinel might still be active, or at least the leftover traps. He typed a few commands into the console, setting the freighter's autopilot to power down. "We don't want them to take the ship, but maybe we can slip away in the confusion." The hull groaned as the intruders began to cut through the main hatch. "No time," Jamin hissed. "Let's go." They hurried to the cargo ramp, lowering it just enough to slip out into the darkness. The moment they hit the ground, blaster fire streaked overhead, scorching the night air. "Run!" Jamin barked, dragging Audris behind a stack of crates. The mercenaries shouted, their footsteps splashing through the mud. Jamin popped off a few return shots, forcing them to take cover. A sizzling bolt grazed his shoulder, sending a shock of pain racing down his arm. He bit back a curse, continuing to run. Audris clutched his hand, fear plain in her eyes, but she kept pace. They sprinted into the jungle, weaving between massive tree trunks. The mercenaries spread out, sweeping the area with flashlights. Laser beams danced among the foliage, forcing Jamin and Audris to duck behind twisted roots. "They're fast," Jamin murmured, scanning the shadows. "We have to keep moving." The air was thick with humidity, and the calls of startled alien creatures echoed around them. Somewhere ahead, the ruins stood silent and ominous. Jamin could only hope that something within them would give these hunters pause. A squad leader's voice barked orders. "Fan out! The target's vital for the boss!" Jamin's gut twisted. They wanted Audris specifically. Her species must be extremely valuable, either for the glow-based abilities or some twisted breeding scheme. The thought made rage boil in his veins. He wouldn't let them have her. He squeezed Audris's hand, and she squeezed back, showing silent resolve. Together, they pressed on, hearing the crunch of footsteps close behind. At last, the crumbling arch of the ruins materialized in the moonlit gloom. Jamin guided Audris over a collapsed wall, then ducked into a dark corridor. "We'll circle around," he whispered. "Lure them to the central chamber, see if we can collapse something on them or reawaken that sentinel." Audris nodded, her markings flickering with anxiety. She tightened her grip on the stun baton, eyes darting. Jamin's shoulder throbbed where the plasma bolt had grazed him, but he pushed the pain aside. They crept deeper, hearing the mercenaries fan out at the entrance. "Wait for my signal," the squad leader hissed. A faint mechanical whine echoed from deeper in the ruins. Jamin's heart leapt. Maybe the sentinel was still functional after all? He pressed a finger to his lips, and Audris followed in silence. Their steps echoed on cold stone. Glowing algae clung to the walls, casting eerie patterns of light. She paused at a symbol, pressing her hand to it just as she'd done before. A faint pulse traveled through the corridor. Jamin tensed, worried the noise would draw attention, but then a hidden doorway rumbled open. Revealing a side passage, Audris tugged on his arm, leading him inside. They emerged on a balcony overlooking the central chamber. Below, they saw the mercenaries creeping in, a squad of 5, all armed, scanning every corner with advanced optics. The basin of shimmering fluid still pulsed in the center of the chamber, casting an otherworldly glow. The mercenaries spread out around it, weapons raised. One soldier stepped forward, swirling a scanner through the air. "We've got readings of that alien's biopattern," he said. "She's close." Jamin swallowed hard, hoping they remained unseen. Odris clutched his hand, her breath shaky. She nodded toward the shadows on the opposite side, where a massive shape crouched in the darkness. The sentinel. Its eyes glowed faintly, as if it lay dormant but not dead. He exhaled in relief. If it recognized them as intruders, maybe it would attack. Just then, one of the mercenaries kicked a loose stone, and the clang echoed. The sentinel's eyes flared red. With a grinding roar, it hauled itself upright, shedding rubble from its shoulders. The mercenaries startled, some cursing. "Open fire!" the squad leader yelled. Plasma bolts lit the chamber, ricocheting off the sentinel's rusted armor. "Oh!" Driss flinched, burying her face against Jamin's side. He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. This was their chance. The sentinel charged, massive fists swinging. One mercenary was crushed instantly, the armor cracking with a sickening crunch. Another was flung across the chamber. The squad leader barked frantic orders, but their weapons seemed to do minimal damage. In the chaos, Jamin gestured for Odris to follow him. They slipped along the balcony, heading for the corridor that led back to the entrance. If the sentinel and the mercenaries tore each other apart, that was fine by him. But as they neared the exit, they saw 2 more mercenaries standing guard, scanning the darkness. Jamin cursed under his breath. Their path was blocked. They'd have to find another way out. Suddenly, a scream echoed behind them as another mercenary fell to the sentinel's relentless assault. Odris let out a soft whimper. Jamin noticed her gaze flick to the shimmering basin. An idea sparked. If that fluid resonated with her, maybe she could manipulate it somehow. "Can you use that stuff?" he whispered. She bit her lip, uncertain. Time was running out. The sentinel roared again, tearing into a support column. Dust and debris rained down. One of the mercenaries near the entrance turned around to peer into the chamber, giving Jamin and Odris a moment of distraction. "Let's try it," Jamin urged, pulling her to the winding stairs that led down to the basin level. They crept in the shadows, heart pounding. The sentinel, locked in combat with the last few mercenaries, was too busy to notice them. Odris inched closer to the basin, her glow reflecting on the pulsing liquid. She hesitated, then slid her hand in, wincing at the jolt of energy that ran up her arm. Her markings flared brilliantly, patterns shifting in a frantic dance. She squeezed her eyes shut, focusing. Jamin hovered protectively, scanning for threats. The 2 guards at the entrance were inching closer, drawn by the noise. In the center, the sentinel crushed another mercenary's weapon, roaring with mechanical fury. Jamin bit his lip, sweat rolling down his brow. Any second, they could be spotted or killed in the crossfire. Odris let out a gasping sound, as if the fluid burned. Her entire body lit in pulses that matched the basin's glow. The translator was on the floor above, so Jamin had no idea what she might be trying to say, but he could sense the strain on her. Then, abruptly, the liquid in the basin began to churn violently, swirling faster and faster, creating a vortex of shimmering light. The guards shouted in alarm, and the sentinel whirled around, red eyes flickering as it recognized a new energy signature. It bellowed, stomping toward the basin. Jamin grabbed Odris around the waist, trying to keep her steady as the swirl intensified. Energy crackled in the air, making his hair stand on end. The sentinel raised a fist, ready to slam it down on them. Jamin braced himself for impact, but at the last second, the swirling liquid shot upward in a column of light, smashing into the sentinel's chest. The force blew it backward, its metal limbs flailing. It toppled like a toppled statue, crashing through columns and sending chunks of stone in every direction. An otherworldly wind whipped through the chamber, nearly knocking Jamin off his feet. Odris cried out, her voice lost in the vortex. Finally, with a thunderous boom, the basin quieted, returning to its usual pulsing state. Odris sagged against Jamin, her body trembling. He swept her up in his arms. Over the dust and echoing roars, he saw that the sentinel was pinned under rubble, disabled. 1 or 2 surviving mercenaries stumbled out of the corridor, coughing, eyes wide with fear. "Retreat," someone yelled. "We can't handle this." Jamin wasted no time. With Odris in his arms, he darted for the exit, stepping over broken stones and battered armor. The mercenaries fled in disarray, racing back through the jungle to their ship. Jamin heard engines firing up, presumably the black vessel's thrusters. Fine by him. If they were running, that meant Odris was safe for the moment. He emerged from the ruins, chest heaving, Odris clinging to his neck. The night air felt blissfully cool compared to the swirling chaos inside. They stumbled toward their own freighter. The battered hull loomed in the moonlight, but it was intact. Jamin eased Odris inside, sealing the ramp behind them. Alarms flickered, reading minimal damage from the mercenaries' initial attempts to breach. "We'll take off," he said breathlessly, carrying her toward the cockpit. "Find a safer spot." She nodded weakly, her glow fading to a dim flicker. He settled her in the co-pilot's seat, ignoring the dull throb in his injured shoulder, and fired up the engines. They roared to life, the power orb humming with renewed vigor, as if energized by Odris's connection to the basin. The black vessel rose into the sky, already pulling away. Jamin watched them shrink on the horizon. "They're leaving," he said with relief. Odris leaned her head back, closing her eyes. He reached over, brushing her cheek. "You did it," he murmured. She gave a faint, grateful smile. Then, with a steady push on the throttle, he lifted the freighter, setting a course away from the ruins and deeper into uncharted territory. When they were finally clear, he let out a long, shaking breath and looked over at Odris. She was trembling, her eyes half-lidded with exhaustion. Gently, he unbuckled her harness and scooped her into his arms again, ignoring the protesting ache in his muscles. She melted against him, her luminescent patterns wan, but her expression was peaceful. He carried her back to the makeshift medbay, settling her on the cot. "Rest," he whispered, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. She nodded, her eyes fluttering closed. For several minutes, Jamin just watched her breathe, the translator earpiece lying nearby. A wave of tenderness swelled in his chest. They'd known each other for less than 2 days, but the depth of his feelings already frightened him. She'd risked her life, using her people's mysterious resonance to save them both. She'd shown courage, vulnerability, death, ire, and now, as she dozed in an exhausted sprawl, he realized how protective he felt. Maybe it was crazy to feel this attached so soon, but he couldn't deny it any more than he could deny his own heartbeat. He brushed the hair from her face, then quietly left to patch up his shoulder wound. He found a half-functional medical kit and disinfected the burn, hissing at the sting. The memory of her warm body pressed to his flashed through his mind, sending a shiver down his spine. He wrapped up the wound, then made his way to the cockpit to ensure their flight path was stable. He set a low orbit, scanning for any sign of the black vessel. Nothing. For now they were safe. Jamin allowed himself a moment to slump in the pilot's chair, running a hand through his hair. The events of the past day felt surreal. He'd gone from a lone scavenger to the unexpected mate of an alien woman on the run from slavers, and ironically, it felt more right than anything in his life before. The ship hummed softly. He let out a weary sigh, flicking the autopilot to keep them on a steady drift. Then he trudged back to the medbay, heart twisting at the sight of Odris curled on the cot. Carefully, he lay down beside her, not wanting to disturb her rest. But, unable to resist her warmth, she stirred, letting out a soft hum and nestled against his side. He draped an arm over her, inhaling the faint, sweet scent of her hair. The translator lay, unused, nearby. Words weren't necessary right now. The steady thump of her heart against his chest soothed him like a lullaby. Outside, alien stars and swirling nebulae framed the night. Inside, Jamin's heart felt surprisingly full. He pressed his lips to Odris's temple, lingering on the promise of her presence. A fleeting fear of the future crossed his mind. More mercenaries would come, or corporate thugs. The galaxy was vast and dangerous. But for this moment, safety cradled them. He drifted into a dreamless sleep with her in his arms, lulled by the gentle hum of the freighter and the warmth of her bioluminescent glow. When he woke, faint daylight peeked through the cockpit window. The planet's sun must be rising again, or maybe a second star in the system. Odris was stirring, blinking awake with a soft yawn. Jamin stroked her arm. "Morning," he said hoarsely. She smiled, that sweet, uncertain curve of her lips that melted his chest. The translator wasn't on yet, but he didn't need it to see the question in her eyes. What now? Iswitsi had the translator on, offering it to her. She adjusted it and spoke quietly. We go? Somewhere safe? The device spat out the approximate meaning. Jamin rubbed his sore shoulder, thinking. We could try to find a hidden station, maybe a black market port that won't ask questions, he reasoned. But they might be crawling with slaver informants. Or we could keep jumping from system to system. He trailed off, uncertain. The galaxy was a big place, and they had few resources beyond a battered ship and each other. Odris looked away, biting her lip. Her markings flared a dull orange, signaling anxiety. She hesitated, then whispered into the translator, My home, destroyed. My clan scattered, but some live. I must find them. Or... Her voice broke and she glanced at him with pleading eyes. A pang clenched his heart. Of course she wanted to find any surviving family or kin. That might be her only chance to truly be safe. He nodded slowly, brushing his thumb over her knuckles. We'll find them, he promised. If we have to search every star cluster out there, we'll do it, together. She exhaled, relief and gratitude shining in her gaze. Slowly, a tremulous smile crept onto her lips. She pressed her forehead to his, breathing in sync. Ear markings warming to a gentle pink. He closed his eyes, letting the moment wash over him. We have each other, he murmured. That's a start. After a quick meal of ration packs, during which Odris made a face at the bland flavor, they decided to set down again near a different portion of the planet to do more thorough repairs. The ship's sensors indicated a smaller ruin site, potentially less guarded by giant robotic sentinels. Jamin hoped for some leftover technology, or maybe even a starport, if they were insanely lucky. He guided the freighter through the atmosphere once more, each shudder of the hull reminding him how fragile their craft was. They landed in a clearing surrounded by towering trees, with pastel leaves that shimmered in the breeze. Vines covered the ground, forming natural pathways. Odris gazed out the viewport, mesmerized. Beautiful, she breathed. No translator needed. He smiled, nodding in agreement. Together they descended the ramp, weapons at the ready in case of threats. The air smelled of wet earth and sweet nectar, reminiscent of a lush tropical forest. Overhead, a pair of winged creatures soared, their plumage shining in rainbow hues. As they ventured deeper, they came across a cluster of crumbling domes, much smaller than the previous ruin. Jamin scanned the structures with a battered handheld device. I'm not seeing active energy signatures, he told Odris, relaxing a bit. Might be safe. She nodded, though her markings still flickered warily. They split up slightly to search, staying within earshot. Jamin clambered over a fallen column, wincing at his injured shoulder, but determined to find something they could use to reinforce the ship's hull or upgrade its shields. Suddenly, Odris let out a call. He rushed to her side, heart pounding. She stood in a half-collapsed chamber, staring at something partially buried in the dirt. When Jamin drew closer, he realized it was a skeletal figure, long-limbed like her species, with faintly visible fins and luminescent patterns etched into the bones. Odris knelt beside it, her eyes filling with tears. She whispered words in her own tongue that the translator struggled to parse. Beloved ancestor, it managed awkwardly. Jamin felt his throat tighten, another reminder of the tragedies her people had endured. She reached out and gently touched the skull, then bowed her head, a shimmering tear rolling down her cheek. Jamin crouched beside her, placing a comforting hand on her back. She turned, clutching his arm, her expression gagged. So few remain, she croaked out through the device. He sighed, pulling her into a gentle embrace. We'll keep searching, he vowed. We won't stop. She nodded, burying her face against his shirt. He held her until her tears subsided. As they rose, Odris wiped her cheeks, her gaze hardening with a renewed resolve. She gently touched the skeleton's hand, a silent farewell, then turned to Jamin. We find my kin, she whispered, her accent thick. He nodded, taking her hand, and they left the ruined chamber. Their journey continued deeper into the domes, each step weighed with the knowledge that her people's past lay scattered in bones and crumbling temples. In a smaller room, they discovered a carved stone pedestal. Faded glyphs lined its surface. Odris ran her fingers over them, letting out a small gasp as her markings flared. The translator couldn't keep up, but Jamin gleaned that it was a record or a shrine of some significance. She exhaled, pressing her palm firmly. A faint glimmer sparked, like a last echo of lost technology. Then it died out. She closed her eyes in disappointment. Jamin took out his scanner, trying to see if anything salvageable remained. The readings were near zero. "It's been picked clean," he murmured. Odris hung her head, shoulders slumping. A swirl of pinkish sadness shone on her arms. Jamin chewed his lip, not sure how to comfort her. He brushed his palm over hers gently. "We'll find your people," he said again, though he had no clue where to start. The galaxy was vast, and every lead felt like it led to more ruin. But her hopeful gaze told him she had nothing else to cling to. He wouldn't let her down. They made camp in the clearing that night, too far from the ship to return before dark. Jamin rigged up a small protective field, enough to deter local predators. He lit a portable lamp and they huddled close, sharing the last of the ration packs. Odris nestled against his side, occasionally glancing at the sky where unfamiliar stars blinked overhead. "I always wanted a normal life," Jamin admitted softly, stroking her hair. "A quiet place to call my own. But it never worked out. Always had to move on, keep flying." She nodded, her translator picking up enough of his quiet words to convey the sense of longing. She pointed to herself, then made a swirling gesture. "Me, same," she said, the device chiming. "No home, only running." They lapsed into silence, the midnight, wrapping them in a gentle cocoon. At some point, Odris turned to face him, her eyes shining in the lamplight. "But, together, safe?" she ventured. His heart clenched. "Yeah," he murmured, cupping her cheek. "Safer, at least." She pressed her lips to his in a slow, deliberate kiss, the kind that spoke of both gratitude and desire. He kissed her back, tenderly, letting the reassurance pass between them. In that quiet moment, with the cosmic night overhead, Jamin realized he was no longer alone. They might be hounded by slavers and lost in uncharted territory, but with Odris beside him, he felt a glimmer of belonging. She rested her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped an arm around her, listening to the forest's nocturnal lullaby. Her markings pulsed softly against his skin, lulling him into a warm haze of contentment and longing. Dawn broke in soft pastel hues. They roused, stretching limbs stiff from sleeping on the ground. Jamin helped Odris gather what few supplies they had. Then they hiked back toward the freighter. The forest sparkled with morning dew, and tiny winged creatures buzzed among blooming vines. He held her hand, marveling at how natural it felt. If someone had told him a week ago that he'd be hand with an alien woman whose species believed they were mated, he would have laughed. Now it felt almost inevitable. When they reached the ship, a surprise awaited them, a blinking alert on the comm console. Someone was broadcasting on an open frequency. Jamin stiffened, worried it might be the mercenaries returning. But when he flicked on the receiver, a garbled voice pleaded for assistance. Some local pilot stuck in orbit with engine failure. That in itself wasn't so odd, but the pilot's accent indicated they might be from a less hostile faction. Perhaps a free trader. Jamin glanced at Odris. "Should we answer?" he asked. She shrugged, uncertain. "Could be a trap," he warned, "but maybe an ally." He hailed back, carefully. The pilot sounded relieved, begging for help. "I'll pay," the pilot's voice crackled. "Just get me stable and I'll make it worth your while." Jamin's gut churned. It could be a trick, but the promise of payment could help them find Odris's people. Finally, he agreed to meet the pilot in orbit. Odris watched anxiously, her markings pulsing with trepidation. They lifted off, the ship rattling only slightly after Jamin's patchwork repairs. The planet's swirling clouds parted as they ascended, revealing a battered cargo vessel drifting aimlessly. Jamin opened the docking clamps, guiding them closer. Odris hovered behind him, a hand on his shoulder. The pilot signaled instructions for a remote engine restart. Jamin patched a cable from his own generator to the pilot's ship, scanning the readouts. For a tense few minutes, nothing happened. Then the cargo vessel's engines sputtered to life. A whoop of victory sounded over the comm. The cargo ship drifted beside them, and the pilot, a scruffy dog-like alien named Brath, appeared on the comm screen. "You saved my hide," he rasped in heavily accented standard. "I owe you." Jamin forced a cordial smile. "We'll take trade if you have it. Fuel, rations, maybe any star charts for the region?" Brath nodded enthusiastically. "Come aboard, let's talk." Jamin cut the transmission, turning to Odris. "Think we should go?" She pressed her lips together, swirling lights flickering across her cheeks. "Danger?" the translator offered. He shrugged. "Possibly, but we need the supplies." She took a breath, nodded. He gently squeezed her hand. "Stay alert." They docked airlocks, stepping into the cramped corridor of Brath's vessel. The pilot met them with a wide, toothy grin, wearing mismatched clothes that smelled of engine grease. He eyed Odris with open curiosity. "Interesting crew," he murmured, though he made no hostile move. Jamin introduced himself warily, leaving out details. "We need star charts for the outer systems," he said. Brath rubbed his chin. "I might have something. Let's talk over a drink." They gathered in a cluttered mess hall. Brath offered a pungent beverage that made Odris wrinkle her nose. Jamin sipped politely, his hand near his blaster. Brath launched into a rambling tale of how he was running cargo to a remote outpost when a meteor storm damaged his ship. "I was about to start drifting," he said, shaking his head. "You rescued me, so name your price." Jamin leaned forward. "We need star charts that might show unregistered worlds or rumor of hidden enclaves, particularly any references to rare luminous species." He glanced at Odris. Brath's bushy eyebrows rose. "Luminous? That's quite specific. Heard some tall tales in the trade lanes about glowing folks, mostly legends." Odris shifted uncomfortably. Brath rummaged through a digital pad. "I got partial charts of this region, plus rumors. Could be that 1 or 2 pocket colonies exist." He flicked the pad's display, revealing a cluster of star systems. "Haven been verified, but you might try here," he pointed to an uncharted zone near a pulsar star, "or here," indicating a nebula region known for hazardous navigation. Jamin's pulse quickened. It wasn't much, but it was more than they had. "We'll take whatever you can spare," he said. Brath named a price in credits that made Jamin's stomach drop. They didn't have that kind of money, but the scruffy pilot sniffed, eyeing Jamin's battered clothes. "Maybe you got something else to trade," he suggested. Jamin thought about the alien orb they'd salvaged, but they needed it for power. He had a few spare mechanical parts. As if reading his mind, Odris tugged gently on Jamin's sleeve, then stepped forward, rummaging in a pouch at her waist. She pulled out a small luminescent crystal, one that resembled the basin's fluid in solid form. Jamin hadn't even realized she'd taken it. She offered it to Brath, who gasped. "By the stars," he whispered, wide-eyed. "That's beautiful. Must be worth a fortune to the right buyer." He snatched it greedily, practically salivating. "Done," he said immediately, handing over the star chart data. Jamin's chest twisted with guilt and relief, but Odris simply nodded, exchanging a firm look with Jamin. This was the cost of seeking her people. He thanked Brath, tucking the datapad under his arm. Then they made their escape, back to the freighter. Once aboard, Jamin powered up the new star charts. "We have a few leads," he told Odris, pointing to the pulsing star cluster. She leaned closer, her hand sliding over his on the console. Her eyes glimmered with hope. "We go," she said simply. He smiled, setting the course. The old ship groaned, but complied. As they jumped to FTL, Jamin glanced at Odris. Her face was lit by the console's glow, her markings a determined gold. He laced his fingers through hers. They were on a mission now. No more random drifting. They would search the stars until they found her clan, or at least the truth of what remained. And maybe along the way they'd prove that 2 lost souls could find a home in each other. The hum of the engines deepened as they accelerated. Odris leaned her head on Jamin's shoulder. He kissed her hair, the gentle glow of her body his new anchor. For the first time in his life, the vast emptiness of space didn't feel so lonely. They shared a future now. Uncertain, dangerous, but undeniably theirs. He wrapped an arm around her, guiding the freighter into the whirling tapestry of light and stars. Somewhere in that cosmic ocean lay the answers they sought, and no matter what challenges waited, they would face them together, side by side, heart to heart.